this morning, and we did have some technical difficulties with archiving. To try and prevent that from occurring, it's very important that you follow the guides that have just been sent to the chat area, that you should use your telephone for audio, not the computer sound, the telephone. And to avoid feedback, you should click on the handset icon that's in the audio window below at the bottom left-hand section.
Bottom right.
Bottom. It's the bottom right section of the audio teleconference section. So are we recording now?
Yes.
Okay.
Not yet. No, we're going to. Yes. She started.
We are recording.
Yes.
Okay, great. Now let's ask them how they hear the sound.
Okay. Yeah. Everybody, hi folks. This is John Mullen. I'm working with Elias here on our presentation today, and we want you to use not the computer but your telephone in order to hear this. We had trouble this morning when people were trying to use their computer, and it seemed to be causing static on the lines badly. So please don't use the computer, use the telephone connection. And in order to disable the computer part, it is the little microphone icon in the lower right-hand corner of the part that says Audio Multiple Talkers. Click on that to disable the sound on your computer. Now, would somebody say, please on the chat line so that we can hear you? We're not hearing you. We have you muted because with all the people we're going to be working with here, we can't possibly have you unmuted. But would you, on the chat section, just type in saying, yes, we can hear you. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tell me you heard 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.
All attendees have been muted.
Great. We're getting good responses. Here is.
All attendees have been muted.
No. We said no. Two.
Confer conference center. For security verification, please enter your passcode followed by the pound or hash key. Please hold while I confirm your passcode.
All attendees have been muted.
Your passcode is confirmed. The host has placed the meeting into a listen-only mode. Please wait for the tone. Then say your name and press the pound or hash key.
Kevin McElroy.
When you hear the tone, you will be the 129th person to join the meeting.
Well, I don't hear them. I think we're probably okay. Folks, I'm going to ask one more time, can you hear us clearly? Okay. Well, then I think we're going to begin. It looks like we're recording, and we don't hear any static reports now, so we're going to begin, and we won't touch anything anymore. Folks, for all of you to know that you have been muted. We won't be able to hear you talking But later on, we'll be talking with questions and answers via the chat sign, via the chat session, and if we need to, we can unmute. But I think we'll probably, given the size of the group we're working with, be staying in muted mode in what is called lecture only. I don't like the sound of that. We don't intend to give lectures here, but we'll have some interchange. Okay, Elias has introduced himself. I'll just take a moment to do that. My name is John Mullen. I'm with Strata Information Group. I know many of you, and I'm happy to say that I wish I could see you, but we'll do the next best thing here and visit as best we can with this audio and computer setup. I wish we were in the same room at the same time so that we would feel a little bit closer and I could read facial expressions and see you say yes, yes, or no, no. But, you know, we'll do the best we can. Again, my name is John Mullen. I have been associated with community colleges for quite a while. I spent about 35 years of my life at the San Mateo County Community College District. In the last 18 of those, I was the Dean of Admissions and Records at College of San Mateo and was very active in the CACRO organization, the California Association of Community College Administrators, Admissions and Records Officers. Since retiring, I have been helping a number of colleges and districts with the implementation of computer systems, and in particular in the area of admissions and records, and in fact attendance accounting, the very subject we're going to be talking about today. So this is kind of one big general help session for everybody. Elias is here. He has all the references and, of course, the wonderful knowledge that he has of the system to share with us and answer questions and so forth. Our job, all of us, from Elias down to colleges and so forth, is to do a good job in attendance reporting so that the state can fairly and appropriately distribute funds through the apportionment funding mechanism to support the educational programs and services that our colleges offer. All of the districts get 80% or more of their operational funds through the state apportionment method, and it's the 320 report, this document that documents student attendance hours, that is the basis of distribution of those apportionment funds. And so we're here just to help you as best we can do the best possible job you can in doing your attendance accounting work and the preparation for the attendance reporting. If all the preparations are made, oh boy, doing the actual reports is a piece of cake. But it's all the stuff that goes into the reporting mechanism that is so important. Okay, so you see our names on the front page here, and we'll move on to pointing out that attendance accounting for the California community colleges touches on so many, many aspects of the operations of our colleges. And you might not realize it, but almost everything we do on our college campuses has an effect, direct or indirect, on this attendance reporting that we have to do. We're not going to talk, of course, about every aspect of our operations that touch on attendance accounting today, but we're going to hit the highlights of those we think are most important, touch on some where there seem to be some fairly common errors that are made, where we can talk about avoiding those errors and avoiding the problems of audit citations and so forth. The academic calendar, to talk about this list just a tiny bit, is fundamental to the process, and the approval of the academic calendar by Sacramento sets off the wheels in motion for establishing courses and reporting attendance hours in those courses. Census dates we're going to be talking about in detail in this presentation. The open enrollment requirement, just to mention that the state gives us apportionment funding for courses that are open to all qualified students. With very few specialized exceptions, our courses must be open to all qualified students. Apprenticeship classes are a special area of instruction that are handled and reported outside the standard 320 reporting system. One important point to mention is that those colleges that have that have apprenticeship courses have to be very careful not to include apprenticeship hours in their regular 320 reporting. They are reported in a separate report to a different office. Distance education touches very heavily on what we're talking about. The way in which distance education courses are structured and the contact hours of those courses reported is very special and needs some discussion a little bit in this process today, but also reference to some very important guidelines that we'll talk about. There are course enrollment and repetition limits that govern what we can report. Some of that is under continuing development as we speak, but we have to stay abreast of course enrollment and repetition limits. Residency requirements are fundamental to the attendance accounting and reporting mechanism. We're not going to talk in detail about how it is determined that a student is a resident of California for attendance accounting, community college attendance purposes, but you know that there's a host of literature on that, and your admissions and records people are experts at that. And we certainly know that Elias's office supports them if they have questions concerning the appropriateness of a resident determination for a student. So these are just a few of the items that touch on attendance accounting. So, how is apportionment revenue allocated? The way in which this pile of money is distributed amongst the colleges is on the basis of full-time equivalent students in attendance, as reported to the CCC Chancellor's office on the CCFS 320 report 3 times each year. FTES is the unit of measure that is used. FTES. What is an FTES? Well, as the words suggest, it's the apportionment, it's the contact hours total that is equivalent to having one student attend 15 hours a week for 2 semesters of 17.5 weeks, or if you're on the quarter system, 3/4 of 11.67 weeks. If you take that one student, multiply by 15, and then multiply by 2 times 17.5, which is 35. If you multiply 15 times 35, you get 525. So, 525 contact hours constitute 1 FTES. Now, it could be 10 students, each attending 52.5 contact hours. It could be 525 students, each attending 1 contact hour. But every 525 contact hours constitute 1 FTES. Note that the community colleges are funded on FTES, not on units, for example, or not on the number of actually head-counted full-time or part-time students. Doesn't make any difference if you have lots of students taking a small number of classes or fewer students taking larger numbers of units. Okay, it's just a unit of measure, 525 contact hours. The FTES that we report is extremely important, not only for the basic apportionment funding, but for a lot of ancillary funding that comes along the way. Lottery revenue, for example, is distributed on the basis of FTES. Basic skills education funding Instructional equipment money, to the extent that it is available, is distributed on the basis of FTES. Funding for library materials, state-funded categorical programs of all sorts. So very important to understand the significance, even beyond the basic apportionment revenue, of the 320 report. Where does all this come from? Particularly, where do the rules and regulations that we operate under for attendance accounting come from? Well, let me tell you that our current system derives largely from the K-12 system, because as those of you who are a student of education history know, the California community colleges began essentially as extensions of unified and high school districts, where a 13th and 14th grade were added to the curriculum, and they became our community college years. And then in later years, much later years, the State Department of Education, so to speak, sold off the community colleges to another group, the Board of Governors of the California Community Colleges. And so we now have our own board governing us. Okay, now then, we have sources of authority behind what we do. The California Legislature is the ultimate source, and it distributes its rules in the form of codes, and the education code is the one that governs us. Many provisions of the education code written by the legislature delegate authority to the Board of Governors of the California Community Colleges. And the Board of Governors issues its rules and regulations in a different format, in Title V of the California Code of Regulations. To take it down even further, our local governing boards of our districts have their own rules and regulations that they publish in some kind of a manual or compendium. And so we have the board rules of our local district that are in conformance with Title V of the California Code of Regulations, which are in conformance with the Education Code. So that's the hierarchy. I might mention, as we talked a little bit of the history there, that the complexity of our current attendance accounting system is due largely to the variations that have come in the way in which we offer our educational programs over the years. When I started teaching, I taught mathematics for a number of years before going into community college administration. Everything was very simple. Of course, this was way back in the dark ages when the courses were offered largely on what we now call the weekly census method. And we had very regular schedules, and most everybody had three unit classes that were 3 lecture hours a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 o'clock, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10 o'clock, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 11 o'clock. It was all very easy in terms of the reporting. But along came the idea of concentrated short-term accelerated courses, courses that met on weekends and courses that met in irregular schedules and so forth. And the more of that came along, the more complicated attendance accounting had to become. Distance education came along many years later, and that added a host of complications and questions and how are we going to handle this and so forth. Well, each of those additions has added new rules and regulations and, unfortunately, complications. So that to manage this system now, we wouldn't have to have had a 2.5-hour session here 30 years ago. It could have been done in one manual. But now we'll be lucky to scratch the surface of the complexities within this session today. We do hope it'll be helpful to you. Our point is this. We want to give you whatever assistance we can to enable you to accurately and completely report the attendance at your colleges for support through the state apportionment funding mechanism. All right. So, moving right along, full-time equivalent student reporting is done on the 320 report. That stands for community college fiscal services, and that 320 is just a number that could be HPQ or 987. It's just the name of the report. It has no significance in terms of computation. There is a companion report, CCFS 321, that separately deals with apprenticeship courses. And as I said earlier, we have to be careful we don't report apprenticeship hours in both categories, but rather just on the 321. The 320 report itself includes a number of things beyond the basic contact hours for classes. It includes flex calendar adjustment to deal with making up for what otherwise would be lost attendance hours due to staff development work being held rather than regular classroom attendance. It includes accounting for center FTES, college districts that have a large off-campus center in which they teach classes that comprise 1,000 FTES in an academic year get a special bonus, and that is accounted for under the Center FTES report. Classes that are approved for CDCP non-credit FTES funding are reported separately in addition to being reported in the basic report. By the way, I mentioned that on the center reporting as well. On the center reporting, those classes are all reported in the basic 320 report and in addition reported in a section called Center FTES. The report requires districts to certify the head count of students taking advantage of the AB 540 non-resident tuition exemption. That's the exemption for non-resident students who have attended 3 years of high school in California and earned a high school diploma from that California high school. They are exempted from payment of the non-resident tuition fee. And finally, it includes some information, or some numbers, I should say, the FTES of K-12 students involved in PE classes, because there are some special limitations of how much FTES can be accounted for in PE classes for the attendance of young K through 12 students. So, two reports, the 320 and the 321. The year is divided into 3 unequal periods for the 320 report. In fact, the districts submit 3 320 reports each year. A so-called first period report covering the period from July 1 to December 31. By the way, that's a full half of the year, isn't it? So they're anything but equal periods. So that first period report, which is submitted on January 15th, gets the ball rolling. Then there's a second period report, where the period covered specifically on that report is January 1 to April 15, and that is submitted on April 20th. And finally, at the end of the academic year, and at the end of the third reporting period, June 30th, we compile the annual report, which is due on July 15th. Now, many people mistakenly assume that the first period report just deals with the first period, July 1 to December 31. And the second period report would deal with the second period, January 1 to April 15th, and so forth. Nothing could be further from the truth. Each of those 3 reports is actually an annual report. Now you may say, well, that's ridiculous. How can you do an annual report when only half of the year is over as of December 31st? How can it be an annual report? Well, I'll tell you how it can. It's a report of what is projected to be the FTES for the entire year that began on July 1 and will end on June 30th. Well, how in the world are you going to report that second part there that goes to June 30th when the date hasn't even come? You do it on the basis of estimation. So the first period report is half truth and half guesswork. The actual attendance is reported for the period July 1 to December 31, and then some multiplying factors called annualizers are applied to that data to, quote, annualize it, to estimate what it will be at the end of the year. Now, because only half the year has taken place by the first period, it's understandable and understood by all concerned that it is a somewhat rough estimate. The second period report, which again is an annual report, is based on more truth and less guesswork. The actual attendance all the way through April 15th is reported, and just a little bit of guesswork involving the period from April 16th to June 30th. Finally, the annual report, all the guesswork is gone. There just isn't any more. And it's all the actual data, and that report is the one that is ultimately audited for accuracy in terms of the numbers reported to the state, which govern the apportionment revenue distribution. So everyone understands we have 3 annual reports. So if anybody ever asks you, well, I don't know, don't you just add up the first period, the second period, and the third period, you all know now that you don't add what's on those 3 reports. Each of them is an annual report. By the way, there is one more opportunity later in the year to do some reporting if necessary. If the district determines that there was an inaccuracy in the annual report, it can file a recalculation report, recalc report in shorthand terms. And that report is filed in the month of November. The 1st of November it is due. About the 15th of October, they open the system and the data can be put in and the report certified on the 1st of November. Now, most districts don't have to file a recalc report, but where an error is determined and discovered, it certainly is better to file a recalc report than to have erroneous data being the basis of a request for apportionment funding. Okay. Now then, the 320 report slices and dices the data in lots of different ways, and we have to analyze our students to determine who are California residents and who are not. You might say, well, since apportionment funding only pays for resident students, why are we talking about non-resident students? Well, we have to report to the state because the legislature wants to know how many resident students we are serving and how many non-residents we are serving. So we do include them in the report, but we're not funded on the basis of non-resident students except those with the AB 540 exemption.
John, can I interject?
Sure.
Even though non-residents are not eligible for apportionment, you do receive lottery money for their FTES. So if you leave out non-residents, you're losing out on lottery money.
Good motivator. Elias has got our interests at heart here. That's good to hear. Okay, we've got another way we analyze our students, or break them down, so to speak. I always love that breakdown analysis. Well, I won't tell that joke here. Students enrolled in credit courses are separated from students enrolled in specified non-credit courses. We report credit and non-credit separately. Why? Because it is funded differently. We actually get more money at the district level for credit courses than we do per FTES of non-credit courses. Okay, now we're about to get started through the details of the calculation of contact hours, which are extremely important. Before we do that, I want to take a quick look at the questions that have been submitted on the chat line so far. And if you have a question you want to ask on anything that's been said so far, feel free to write it down. but we'll be moving into the material that will generate questions right now. Elias?
By the way, John, I've responded to a couple of questions.
Great.
I'm CCO.
Great.
So the first question had to do on the availability of the PowerPoint. I indicated that we were going to publish the PowerPoint on our Fiscal Services website by the end of the day.
Good. The question about something about a 16-week calendar. Everything we're going to be talking about here applies to all of the variations on academic calendar. It's just that with certain calendars, there are some special provisions that handle some of the complications that are addressed. But yes, we'll be covering that. Absolutely. Okay, seeing no further questions, we're going into the meat and potatoes here. Now put on your thinking caps and shut the door if you're in any office where you can be distracted, because you've got to follow this all the way through or you'll get lost and it won't mean anything. Okay, here we go. You see 5 items listed there: plain English language, clock hour, class hour, passing time break, partial class hour, multiple hour class. We all know the meaning of those words in general English. But guess what? You're going to hear some definitions now that translate those into the special language of California Community College attendance accounting. And trust me, some of them, if you're not familiar with this, will seem strange to you. So hold on to your seats, because, you got a few little grammatical surprises coming along here. So be patient with us, and it'll be fine. All right, the first one actually is easy. The clock hour is exactly what we know it as in real life, so to speak. 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, 8:10 to 9:10, 8:20 to 9:20. Those are just plain old ordinary hours that we read off a clock. By contrast, what we call a class hour is something different. It's a period of not less than 50 minutes of scheduled instruction or examination. There can be only one class hour, however, in each clock hour, except as provided for multiple hour classes. Now that sentence is a mouthful, and I apologize for it, but I didn't write it. Okay, but we'll explain it, and you'll see what it means when we get through this whole thing. A class hour is commonly called a contact hour or a student contact hour. Before we leave this page, let's go back to that first thing there, a period of not less than 50 minutes of scheduled instruction or examination. I might just mention some colleges occasionally have, for very good educational reasons, the desire to schedule a class for, say, 45 minutes long, and have several of them that they say, well, they'll add up to the right number of hours that we have to have, so what's the difference? Well, again, I didn't make these rules, folks, so don't blame me, but the rules say you cannot report attendance for apportionment purposes for anything less than 50 minutes in a session. So you just simply can't do it. The next one, there can be only one class hour in each clock hour. Well, if you read that first one, the 50-minute deal here, if 50 minutes constitutes a class hour, somebody could say, well, no, wait a minute here. A clock hour is 60 minutes. And if 50 minutes is a class hour, why can't we say that that clock hour has 1.2 class hours in it? Well, I would say as a math student, go to the head of the class. You're brilliant in figuring that out. But as a community college attendance accountant, you flunked because of that second rule. There is only one class hour possible in each clock hour. Now, forget the exception for now. We'll come back to that exception. Okay? So that's the difference between a class hour and a clock hour. Now, what am I doing here? Wrong mouse. To go on to the next one. Passing time break. Each clock hour is composed of one class hour segment and a segment referred to as a passing time or break. No additional attendance may be claimed for this 10-minute segment except for multiple hour classes. Well, this just says in a lot of words what I told you a few minutes ago about taking that 10 minutes and putting it on the 50 and thinking you're going to get 1.2. Okay? That 10 minutes is the passing time. Got it? And remember my old-fashioned deal here. We went to class 9 o'clock to 9:50, had a 10-minute break from 9:50 to 10 o'clock. That was the passing time when we scrambled to get to the other classroom where the next class was, and then we took the class from 10 to 10:50. We scrambled from 10:50 to 11, and blah, blah, blah. You know that picture. Okay. Now we come into some new terminology that is going to get us back to that exception business we were talking about. A partial class hour. It's the fractional part of a class hour at the end of a multiple hour class. Well, we better say, what's a multiple hour class? A multiple hour class is defined as a class scheduled for more than one clock hour. Now notice it says more than one clock hour. It doesn't say that it has to be like 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, okay? Anything over 1 clock hour would be a multiple hour class. So a class that was 1 hour and 5 minutes, 1 hour and 10 minutes, 1 hour and 15 minutes, 5 hours and 50 minutes. They would all be multiple hour classes. And by the way, just in those examples I gave you, I pointed out one of the rules of attendance accounting. You can't have classes separated or in increments of less than 5 minutes. In other words, you can have a class that's an hour long, an hour and 5, an hour and 10, an hour and 15, but you can't have a class that's 63 minutes or 72 minutes or stuff like that. It has to be 5-minute intervals. All right. So you now know what a multiple hour class is, and you know that the fractional part at the end of a multiple hour class is called a partial class hour. Talking more about multiple hour classes. Each 50 minutes, exclusive of breaks, is a class hour. A partial class hour beyond the last full clock hour is counted from the 51st minute of the last full clock hour. Oh, this is about where, if you haven't heard this before, you're saying, what in the devil is he talking about? This is gobbledygook. Well, it isn't really. You'll understand it. And once you understand it, you've got it for life. Now, let's talk it through. First of all, let's give an example. Let's say we have a class that is an hour and 5 minutes long. Well, clearly that is a multiple hour class by the definition we gave. Although it's just a little bit over an hour, it is over an hour. It's an hour and 5 minutes long. Each 50 minutes exclusive of breaks is a class hour. So let's say it started at 8 o'clock in the morning and it went to 9:05. From 8 o'clock until 8:50 is 1 class hour. A partial class hour beyond the last full clock hour is counted from the 51st minute of the last full clock hour. Well, there was only 1 full clock hour in the example I gave. It was from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, right? So the partial class hour, which would at the moment be the 5 minutes that hung over after that hour, isn't the 5 minutes. Rather, it is counted from the 51st minute of the last full clock hour. So we back up to 8:51 and count from 8:51 to 9:05. How many minutes are there? 15 minutes. So we have the basic class, class hour from 8 to 8:50, and then we have a 15-minute partial class hour. Got that? I hope so. No break is allowed in the last full clock hour or the partial class hour. So that means in my little example here, there's no break from 8 until 9:05. The students are glued to their seats from 8 until 9:05. The divisor for this partial class hour is 50. Ho, ho, ho. How many minutes were there? 15. When we divide 15 by 50, that's the same as dividing 30 by 100, or 3 by 10. So it's 0.3 of a class hour, 0.3 of a contact hour that we get for that 15 minutes. So the class that runs from 8 o'clock until 9:05 without a break constitutes 1.3 contact hours. Now, if anyone has any question about that example, please ask it now, because it's fundamental that you understand that computation of 1.3 hours for the class that went from 8 o'clock until 9:05. Does anybody have any question on that point? I don't see any questions coming in, so I will.
There's no question, David.
Well, there's an earlier question, but I don't think it was about that. Let's come back here.
It's a 50-minute.
All right, hold on.
Somebody answered it.
Class session of, what about passing time? We'll hold on just a minute. Let me read this one question. Class session of less than 50 minutes cannot be reported for apportionment. Where can I find documentation of that rule? It's in the attendance accounting manual for sure.
Yeah, and it's also in Title V, and I believe that the correct reference is what somebody posted, 58023. And I'll verify that.
He'll be checking while I go on to the next question here. What about passing time? I'm not sure I know what the question is about passing times. Stephanie, the questions and answers will be available on this recording that we're making, and you can listen to them again, but there is no plan to transcribe all of the questions and answers. 58023 is the Title V reference you've asked for. Elias is a walking Title V. I've never heard of anybody who knows so many section numbers by heart. So there you are. So again, my 1.3 hours, that's a building block now we're going to be building on in lots of different cases here. So I haven't seen any questions come up. These are all very good students this afternoon, and that's great. Okay. So we will go on now, and here comes a little exercise for us to strain our brains on. One by one, we're going to talk through these and make sure you understand on the right-hand side the number that I say are the contact hours. First of all, from 9 until 9:50, clearly one contact hour, 50 minutes, no more, no less. 9 to 10, one contact hour. Remember that passing time in there, that 9:51 to 10 doesn't buy us anything in terms of contact hours. 9 to 10:05, that's the example I gave, how we calculated that 0.3 to get 1.3. 9 to 10:50, that's two contact hours. There is an implied break between 9:51 and 10 o'clock. Whether or not the teacher observes that break time, you cannot get more than 2 hours, because remember that rule, no more than one class hour in a clock hour. From 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock, with or without breaks in it, 2 contact hours. The breaks, by the way, obviously in 9 to 11 would be from 9:50 to 10 and from 10:50 to 11. So whatever. 9 to 11:05, 2.3. Where do we get that? Well, 9 to 10 is 1 hour. 10 to 11:05 is 1.3. You do get a break from 9:50 to 10, but you don't get a break from 10:50 to 11. And that's 2.3 contact hours. And now we go to the bottom line here on this screen, namely 9 to 11:30. Let's do that one together, and then we'll be in good shape. 9 to 11:30. Okay. 9 to 10, that's 1 hour. 10 to 11 or 10 to 10:50 is that second contact hour. And then we've got from 10:51 to 11:30, don't we? 10:51 to 11:30. Well, that's 40 minutes. 40 divided by that divisor of 50 is 0.8, and so we have 2.8. Again, there would be a break from 9:50 to 10, and there would be a break from 10:50 to 11. No, there wouldn't. Ooh, I take it back. That one only has one break from 9:50 to 10, because remember that 10:50 to 11, that's the last full clock hour. So you don't get a break there. You only get one break in that class. Okay, so now we got a couple of questions coming along here, and we'll see what they are. And I guess it's just one. We may not be there yet, but I'm curious about how 1.9 are computed on the sheet you provided for 95, 100, and 105-minute classes. Well, it's not a mathematical formula that does it, but it's the rule about the one class hour in each clock hour that gets you there. There is no way to get any more than 1.9 hours out of that unless you go beyond 2 clock hours. So it's the formula breaks down, if you will. It's not a mathematical computation, but you'd have to go over 2 hours in order to get that 2.3 hours that you get by going 5 minutes more. Remember, we're restricted to 5-minute intervals here. So you're not going to get up to the 2 hours until you get to a full 1 hour and 50 minutes. And so when you're underneath it, you're stuck down there at 1.9. There's just no better way you can get it. So can you count 2 hours for 1 hour and 50 minutes, but not hour one? Absolutely. Yes, you can. That is correct. If it makes sense educationally, I'm sure is what it means here, to offer classes shorter than 50 minutes, are you saying they may not be offered that way, or that they just can't be reported for apportionment? Well, they can't be reported for apportionment. They can't constitute contact hours that are auditable against the requirements and so forth. So, I mean, there's nothing that stops a group of enthusiastic students and professors getting together. But
right, I think part of that, if you're scheduling a course for less than 50 minutes, not only you're running into issues with apportionment, but even if you don't claim apportionment, there are the credit hour requirements in order for you to award a unit of credit, and you know, you get into that potential problem if your meeting's only half hour long and you're still trying to award unit of credit. It may not all come out correctly to the right amount of contact hours to award unit of credit.
I think it's risky to say I'm going to make my Carnegie unit minimums by doing a bunch of 30-minute sessions rather than 60, even if you are willing to sacrifice the apportionment funding. It's just not practice that's done. You might, if you really want to pursue that point, you might talk to the Academic Affairs Division people about it, but it doesn't sound right. But 150 is not 2. No, it is not 2 clock hours. You don't need 2 clock hours. You get for 50 minutes. You need the 2 clock hours. You need more than 2 clock hours in order to get more than 2 contact hours is the message. 1 hour and 50 minutes, a class that's 1 hour and 50 minutes renders 2 contact hours. But remember, the rule says you can't get more than that. So you're stuck to 2 for anything up to 2 clock hours. But then when you go over 2 clock hours, you can get beyond 2 contact hours. It doesn't, because you have to have that. Zeke, I'm looking at your statement here. 145 should be, well, now I can't see it. 145 comes out, you've got 1 hour there from let's say it's from 8 to 9:45. You've got 1 contact hour from 8 to 8:50, a passing time from 8:50 to 9, and then you've got 45 minutes beyond that. You can't get up to 2 hours because you haven't gone over 2 hours. So you're stuck at the 1.9. Walk through 100 minutes equals 1.9. Walk through 100 minutes equals 1. Again, you're going to have trouble making formula out of all this. 9 until 10:40. So you get 9 until 9:50. Then you go back, and you would like to get to 2 hours. You can't get to 2 hours unless you go 9 to 10:50. You'd have to go up to 10:50 to get that second hour.
Otherwise, it would be gamed. Otherwise, everybody would just schedule a class for an hour and 40 minutes and count two contact hours. Obviously, the intent of this multi-hour class isn't for you to be able to do that. So if you're going to be claiming 2 contact hours, it has to be at least an hour and 50 minutes. Below that, you can go up to 1.9.
To say that it's perfect arithmetic is an impossibility. It's not. The formula business breaks down at the end there.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
But you're to this restriction that in order to get 2 contact hours, you must have at least 1 hour and 50 minutes of instruction.
Can we show them?
Can we display the card? Yes,
yeah.
we can.
We'll do that right now.
Yes, we can.
And so that's why we provided this to kind of help you with the contact hour computations in 5-minute increments, and you can utilize that.
You don't have to strain your brain on doing these calculations, but we've explained as best we can, given that it's not perfect mathematics, here it is. Now, what do? I open it. Hold on, folks. We're going to display this in a second here, if I can remember what to do.
Then you do.
So then I go here, and I go Tools,
App Sharing,
and I
Share
go
Application.
Host App. No,
you already host
Share Application and Adobe Reader. And there we are. Here's the table. And again, if you don't want to, as I say, do the calculations by hand, this is certainly a good, easy way to do it. And this is the way it works according to the regulations. And it doesn't do any good to try to argue those formula arguments in that 1.9 area to think you're going to get more than it. You're just not going to get more than it than the 2. And again, please don't blame Elias and me for this. This is the legislature's way they did it, and it's the way that it has been interpreted for years and years and years and years. Now, questions about break. So this, by the way, we're going to show you in a little while. We'll navigate through the Chancellor's Office website where, in case you don't have copies of these documents, you're going to be able to find every one of them yourself, any hour of the day or night that you have internet connectivity. By the way, this table stops at 4 hours and 55 minutes. You could extend it on. Obviously, you see the pattern. You start out on the evens with 0, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, 9. And then again, 0, 0, 0. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9, 9. Okay. Now we want to get back. So we go to Tools, Application Sharing, Host Applications. All right. Now, do we have more questions here? We want to be a little bit careful, but let's just see what they are quickly. So the first, a lot of questions about passing period. Okay, here's the story on that, as I've understood it for quite a while. We know what we can report in terms of apportionment funding. It is expected for general educational purposes, that if you have a 3-hour class, you don't keep the students glued to their seats for 3 solid hours. In the 3-hour class, let's just say it went from 7 to 9:50, where you'd have 3 contact hours. You've got the right to a 10-minute break in the first hour, the right to a 10-minute break in the second hour. That's 20 minutes. In most cases, instructors will do one 20-minute break somewhere in the middle of that class to give the students an opportunity to stretch. If for some reason the instructor doesn't do it, and there's mutual agreement between the instructor and the students, we don't want any breaks, it breaks continuity, we love our class so much we don't want any breaks. Well, too bad, you're not going to get any more apportionment money for it, and that's the way it goes. So to say whether breaks are enforced, I don't think any policeman's going to come to make sure you took a break.
That's correct, John. There's nothing in Title V that I've ever seen in terms of requiring the breaks. What we've shown you is basically that within each contact hour there is a break or passing time period, but it's not required. And if you have a very long class, it's up to your local policy in considering the health and welfare of the students as to how many breaks are required for the particular class.
So I think we've taken care of the breaks. So we've talked about that. Class runs from 9 to 10:50 as a college required to schedule in a 10-minute break. Well, again, that's the option of the instructor as to how he does it, but there is one 10-minute break allowed. I don't want more. I do not want more. What you should well, I'm sure he's saying, would you explain why isn't 100 minutes 1.8 hours? Well, we've explained that you have to have that 10-minute break in each standard hour, and I don't know how what more we can say there. Would we include that when you post the PowerPoint?
We've already posted the contact hour listing.
Yes, we have.
So it's on our website, and it'll be at the same place, but we are going to add the PowerPoint presentation.
And Abe, you're absolutely right. Breaks can become an issue with faculty contracts. And certainly, if the faculty have the right to take the breaks that they are permitted here, but you better not write a faculty contract that says more than that, or you're not going to be able to report the class for apportionment. I mean, I don't know what more to say on that. Elias, any thoughts?
Right. Obviously, that part of it's a local issue. But what I've seen in terms of the one of the other parts of my job is reviewing academic calendar compression applications. And every compressed calendar application where they've provided to us their proposed scheduling patterns, that way we can compute the contact hours and FTES that will be generated in those compressed calendar schedules. The districts always standardize, at least on these applications, how many breaks are available to the different course sections based on how they're scheduled, based on the number of units and all that. So there is standardization that I've seen in every application on the breaks and the break patterns. That's something that chief instructional officers, scheduling officers always take into account. And so it's a local issue, but something that is normally standardized for most classes at the colleges.
Yeah, and I will tell you, to answer, I'm going to go, well, let's take the questions in order here. Measurements come from the 51st of the last clock hour, the last full clock hour. It's the last full clock hour. So in the case of a class that ran, for example, from 8 o'clock until 11:05, where you have 3 hours and a little fraction, you're counting from the 51st minute of that last full clock hour, which is 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock. That's the last full clock hour. So you go back to 10:51 and count the 15 minutes to 11:05. That's the rule.
And you can only do that if it's continuous instruction. It has to be continuous instruction from, in that example, 10 to 11:05.
No break.
There is no break. If you somehow include a break at 10:50, you can't do that anymore. And those 5 minutes are lost. You can't claim apportionment for those 5 minutes.
You'd end up with just 3 contact hours.
Correct.
Rather than the 3.3. All right, now, did we take them in order? Yes, we did. Now, this next one, regarding breaks, faculty sometimes want to let classes out early after not getting any break. In a 3-hour class, they want to let the class out 30 minutes early because they gave no break. Are we saying that's okay? No, I'm not saying that's okay at all.
No, that is not okay. The expectation is that you're claiming contact hours based on the scheduled hours. And as one of the rules is that you cannot accumulate the break time
take it all
at the end. That's in the Superintendent's Accounting Manual. So no, that is not okay.
Not okay. That class.
What I was referring to in terms of the latitude that districts have on breaks was relative to like in these multi-hour class, 3-hour class, and you have the option of taking a 10-minute break in the first clock hour and in the second clock hour. But if, like John said, if the instructor doesn't want to do it, you're not getting any more apportionment. But in terms of a state law, that instructor didn't break a law saying, oh, you need to take a break. There might be a local issue, a local policy, in terms of breaks. But somebody asked about, is there like a state requirement about those breaks? There isn't.
Yeah, but let's get back to the business of what flexibility do you have with those breaks? We've said that standard practice does allow for the concentration, for example, of 2 10-minute breaks into a single 20-minute break in the middle of the class period. That happens routinely and regularly, and it's good educationally, and it's good every other way. But what isn't appropriate is to say we won't have any breaks and we're going to go home early. And what
isn't an option either is in applying this multi-hour class rule. You have to have a full clock hour and a partial class hour continuous in order to utilize that rule. So that break better not break into that period.
Yeah. 2.5 contact hours. Go the other way. Look at your table. Decide when the class is going to be. 1:30 to 3:45. That is 2 hours and 15 minutes. 2 hours and 15 minutes. Looking over at the table, 2 hours and 15 minutes is 2.5 contact hours. 2 hours and 20 minutes is 2.6 contact hours. So 2.5 would be 1:30 to 3:45. The 1:30 to 3:50 would be 2.6. Is there any way we can limit the number of questions so we can move on?
Well, brings up a good point.
We're about to do that, so you make a good suggestion. Take a quick gander at these, and then we're multiple hour classes have a 10-minute break. Well, you can redistribute them, as we said, in the middle of the class, but we can't change it computationally. Some want to teach through, breaks, discipline, faculty, math, science, da. Well, we've already said now what is acceptable and what isn't, so it's up to you folks to work with it. But the one hard and fast rule with respect to the breaks is no, you can't say no breaks and we're going to go home early. The only way you can do that home early is in that last hour of a 3-hour class. For example, if you had a class that goes from 7, you could say it's a 7 to 10 class. Well, it's really 7 to 9:50. So you are going home 10 minutes early there. That break for the last hour, if you want to think of it that way, is that 10 minutes. But you can't do it. You can't say we're going to cut the class off 30 minutes because we didn't take any breaks. Okay, got to move on here. So, we're talking about attendance accounting methods. Every class that we offer has to be assigned to an attendance accounting method, one or the other of the methods. And this is a part that is somewhat complicated that people make mistakes on, so we want to take our time through this a bit here. Once you thoroughly understand it again, you'll, quote, never make a mistake again, but we got to talk it through. All right. The 5 different attendance accounting methods, we're going to talk about 4 of them in detail. The 5th one we're nearly not going to bother with because nobody seems to offer any non-credit distance education that involves 2 censuses. But we're going to publish this on the website. The stuff is all in Title V. If ever you're interested, you can do it. But given the time factor here, we don't want to talk about something that isn't used. Weekly student contact hour method. Let's talk about that one first. Then the daily, then the actual hours of attendance method. Most of us call it the positive attendance method. And then the alternative attendance accounting method. Now, I'll tell you, for years, most of us called that the independent study work experience method. That is not its name anymore because it now includes more than just independent study and work experience. So, going up to the top, the weekly student contact hour method. What classes can be assigned to this method? Well, lots can, but they have to follow the following. Number 1, it can only be used in the primary terms. Well, what in the world is a primary term? In the case of semester colleges, it is the fall and spring semester that are primary terms. Summer and winter sessions, known as intersessions, are not primary terms. That means you can never have a weekly student contact hour class in a summer session, for example. In order to qualify for a weekly student contact hour method, the course must be coterminous with the primary term. Well, that's a fancy way of saying it has to begin at the beginning of the term and end at the end of the term. It has to run through the whole term with amazing regularity. It's for the standard Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 to 10 class and so forth. Okay. It has to meet the same number of days each week during the term. And it has to meet the same number of hours each week, including any TBA hours that are assigned. Now, I want to say right now that TBA is a bit of a red flag. It's something for us to be very careful with because scheduling TBA hours takes on some responsibilities that occasionally are overlooked and become a problem when our auditors visit us. So we'll talk a little more about that later on, but just put a little asterisk by those letters TBA in your brain because they have a very special meaning. Now, somebody says same number of days each week. Gee whiz. During the fall semester, we have one of our weeks that has Thanksgiving in it when we don't have class on Thursday and Friday. How can you say it has to meet the same number of days each week? Well, in this method, and only this method, the holidays are forgiven. If the week has at least 3 days of instruction or examination in it, it counts as a week toward the required number of weeks that you have in the term. So the holidays are forgiven, if you will. It's the only one where you are paid, so to speak, for attendance on holidays. In every weekly census class, we have to pay attention to the census date. And the census week is the week nearest 20% of the number of weeks in the primary term. In semester schools, it's the 3rd or the 4th week, depending upon your format. If that Monday, the census date is Monday of whatever the census week is, and if that Monday is a holiday, like Labor Day, for example, the census date is the following date. Every single weekly student contact hour class, everyone has the same census date, okay? They all have the same date. The term length multiplier is the number of weeks in the primary term with at least 3 days of instruction or examination. Usually that's 17, 18 weeks, averages 17 and a half, and that's the largest number that is available for computation in calendars that are not so-called compressed calendars. The maximum term length multiplier is set at 17 and a half for semesters, 11.67 for quarters. And the specific term length multiplier for your college is set by the Fiscal Services Office, by Elias and Company, and they have a table of those which we have published. Now, you probably already know what your term length multiplier is, and everything's fine, but just in case you wonder, the whole bunch of them is out there on the table that you can see off of the website. To calculate the FTES, for a weekly census class, how do you do it? Well, you take the census weekly student contact hours, multiply them by the term length multiplier, and divide by 525. Well, let's take an example. Let's say we have a class that meets 3 hours a week. It's my famous little Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9 o'clock class, okay? Meets 3 hours a week. Let's say we have a class of 30 students. 3 hours a week times 30 students, that makes 90 weekly student contact hours, right? Now then, we take that, and that means the 30 students were active as of the census date, okay? There may have been 40 students in the class to begin with, but the 30 that we're calculating with here are the 30 who are actively enrolled as of census date. So we take our 30 times 3 to give us 90 weekly student contact hours. We'll multiply that by the term length multiplier, let's say it's 17.5, and divide by 525. 90 times 17.5 divided by 525. Well, I'll let you in on a little secret. 17.5 over 525 is the same thing as 1 over 30. And if you divide 90 by 30, you get 3. So the FTES for that example class is 3. Fair enough? Now, there's a question. We'll stop here for a moment to look at it and see if it's relevant to this. Oh, we did that. Okay. No, it's not a further question. Oh, yeah, here's one. It's been more than 50 minutes. Do we get a break? Terribly sorry. We're not operating under the code rules here.
Right.
What about units? Whatever. Well, we're on our way. Thank you. All right. So, the next method. Daily student contact hour, and lest any of you think we should skip this one to move on, folks, you're misinformed. This is one of the most important, and one of them is fraught with difficulties, so we'll take a little time on this one before we move beyond it. All right, to qualify for daily student contact hour method, the course must meet 5 or more days. If it meets fewer than 5 days, it must be reported by positive attendance, okay? So must meet 5 or more days. It must meet the same number of hours on each scheduled day. You can't have it meet more than a certain number of hours on some days, a certain number on another. I worked with one college that particularly said, well, we have this daily census class that's kind of like our regular term class, a full-term class that's weekly census, but we just accelerated. For example, our weekly student contact hour class in chemistry meets 1 hour a week, 3 hours a week, 3 one-hour classes, okay? Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 o'clock, it meets for 1 contact hour. Then on Tuesday afternoon, it has a 3-hour lab session. So we have this class, it's a 5-unit chemistry class, but it comprises 6 contact hours, 3 for the Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 o'clock, and 3 for the Tuesday 3-hour lab session. They say, now we want to offer that in a concentrated period, and we want to make it a daily census class. And so here's what we propose doing. Instead of having a 1-hour class on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we'll have a 2-hour class on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We'll make it Monday from 9 to 11, Wednesday from 9 to 11, and Friday 9 to 11. And then instead of having that 1 2-hour lab on Tuesday, we'll have another, instead of having that 1 3-hour lab on Tuesday, we'll have another 3-hour lab on Thursday. So we'll have it meet 2 hours on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and 3 hours on Tuesday and Thursday. Now, what's the matter with that? It meets 5 days and so forth. Well, the answer is that doesn't qualify for the daily student contact hour method. It can't be done. If you're going to offer it in that format, it would have to be a positive attendance class. Daily census classes must meet the same number of hours on each scheduled day. And it's designed for classes that are not coterminous with the primary term. By the way, it is possible to have TBA hours associated with a daily census class, but they would have to meet the very same number of TBA hours on each day on which the class meets. So let's say it is a 15-day class that meets for 5 weeks on every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And let's say you said it meets 1 hour in the classroom and then 1 hour TBA. Well, that TBA hour would have to occur on every single day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Most people don't want to schedule anything like that. So TBA with daily student contact hour classes is a virtual impossibility. Each daily census class has a census day. Remember, we said that the census date is common for all weekly census classes. By contrast, each particular section in the daily census method has its own particular census day. It's the day that's nearest 20% of the days the course is scheduled to meet. When it falls on the first day, it's taken on the second. So let's give an example. Let's say we have a 10-day class. It meets Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of 1 week, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of the second week. It's a 2-week, specially concentrated class that has 10 class meetings. The census date, it has 10 meetings. You take 20% of 10, and you get 2. So it's the second class meeting. So it'd be Tuesday of that first class week. If you had a 5-day class, the bare minimum, the 20% point would be on that first day. And that's where the second paragraph there comes in. When it falls on the first day, it's really done on the second day. So every class has its own census day. The course length multiplier is the number of days the course is scheduled to meet. In my example there, it would be 10, wouldn't it? To calculate the daily student contact hours, the FTES for a daily student contact hour class. So let's do it for my example class. Let's say there were 30 students in it. The class meets for, let's say, 2 hours a day, and there are 10 days. We have 30 students times 2, giving us 60 daily contact hours. Multiply by the 10, which is the course length multiplier, we'd have 600. Divide that by 525 to get the FTES. So now you know how to calculate the FTES for any daily census class. Positive attendance, based on the actual count of enrolled students present at each class meeting. Courses meeting fewer than 5 days, it must be used for them because it's the only method left. Courses irregularly scheduled with respect to the number of days per week or number of hours on scheduled days. And all non-credit courses. Every single non-credit course has to be offered by positive attendance. Well, there are a couple of disadvantages of positive attendance that all of you who work with the system know very well. Number one, it required that the instructor maintain day by day accurate records of the presence or absence of each enrolled student. And those records have to be available for audit. They don't, You can't deal with just maintaining the total number of hours the student attended. You have to have records that show day by day what the hours are. And we know just about how much faculty love keeping those kinds of records. Secondly, note that when a student isn't there, there is no hour reported for the student. It's present, seated in the classroom, okay? And non-credit courses, we understand all of them have to be done that way. Okay, don't strain your brain on the FTES calculation. It's the easiest of all. You just take those numbers of hours reported by the faculty member for each student in the class, add them all up, and divide by 525. Now, the alternative attendance accounting method. This method originally was designed for independent study and work experience classes. Those two types of classes have one thing in common. They don't meet on a regular schedule. So how in the world is the state system going to compensate district for teaching that type of a class? There's no number of contact hours to multiply by in its most native form. So what's going to happen? Well, they decided they would do it this way. Let's say that a particular independent study course was a student who made an instructional contract with a faculty member to do a certain amount of academic work under the guidance of the faculty member, and will demonstrate that work by meeting 2 or 3 or 4 times, however many times during the term of the course they decide to meet. And at the end of the term, the teacher will evaluate the work that the student has done and assign a grade to that student. Let's say that it's a 2-unit course, that it has the educational value, if you will, of 2 units. The state says, what are we going to do? How are we going to pay for it? Well, here's what we'll do. We'll pay as though that student were attending a class 2 contact hours per week during a full primary term and compensate accordingly. So they will take that 2 units times 1 student times the term length multiplier, 17.5, and divide by 525 to calculate the FTES for that particular student in that particular class. So it's kind of like assuming the equivalent of the student sitting in a classroom with a teacher 2 hours a week for a full term. Same way for work experience classes. The student may be working tons of hours in the job, but you don't get apportionment attendance for all that tons of hours the student works. If it's a 2-unit co-op ed class where the educational objectives have been set up that there will be 2 units worth of learning done during that work experience, and the student, of course, meets with the teacher and the boss, and they have a conference, and they decided, yes, the student did a good job, and they've learned work habits, and they've learned this and that and the other. At the end of the term, the student gets 2 units. Again, how are they going to compensate it? On the way I just explained, assuming that it's the equivalent of the student sitting in a classroom for 2 hours a day for a full term. Even if the course is offered during the summertime, even if the course is offered over a 3-week period or a 5-week period or an 8-week period, makes no difference. They make the assumption that it's the same amount of work done if you do it in a 3-week period that you do an whole semester. Now, I don't know how you'd ever do that. If you were doing that art student's project or something, you'd be painting awfully quickly to get it all done in a 3-week period. But you understand the concept there. So that course is paid, whether it's summer, winter, anytime, on the basis of calculation for a full primary term. You use the weekly student contact hour method for ones that are full-term courses in a primary term. You use the daily method for all the others, but the computation turns out to be the same. Use that standard term length multiplier in both cases. Now, distance education now falls 99% of the time under this attendance accounting method. So the same thing I told you about the student there who does an individual contract. applies to a distance ed class. If it's a 3-unit class, you're paid as though all of the students in that class who are active as of the census date were seated in that classroom for as many hours a week as units of credit are granted for the class. 1 weekly student contact hour is counted for each unit of credit for which the student is enrolled as of the census date or day. Now here's a special twist. Lab hours, when appropriate, can be added to the contact hours that are derived from the units of credit. This is for classes such as the following. Let's say we have a computer science class, and we're talking about a regular on-campus class, not distance ed, but a regular on-campus class. Let's say this class is a 4-unit class, and let's say it's structured that it has 3 one-hour meetings a week for a full term, and in addition, the students have a 3-hour lab session in a laboratory, much like that chemistry example I gave you before, but this time it's computer science, okay? And the students go to the computer laboratory and they do their exercises in preparation and in conjunction with the lecture class. When that is reported by the weekly student contact hour method, it is reported with 6 contact hours per week, the 3 for the lecture and the 3 for the lab. So we switch to distance education. And we say, okay, we're going to teach this computer science class online. And instead of the students sitting in a classroom, they're going to be going through a certain computer software deal or video program or whatever, do it at their own place, at their own time, and so forth. And instead of coming into the computer laboratory, the students all have their own computers, so they do their laboratory work on their own. And so they say, okay, we're going to do this distance education, and they set it all up, and they say, oh, wait a minute here. You told us that this formula for distance education is only going to give us 4 contact hours for this class. But on campus, when we offer it, we get 6 contact hours. Oh, well, we can't do that. We can't lose revenue, so we can't do it by distance ed. And they cry poor mouths. And the state says, well, I'll tell you what, we'll make it possible. And they do make it possible by allowing laboratory hours, when appropriate, as it says in that last paragraph, to be added to the contact hours derived from each unit of credit. So if you're offering this computer science class that mimics the on-campus class where there are 3 hours lecture and 3 hours laboratory, it is legitimate, provided that the academic work is done that is equivalent, and provided that the students have opportunity for contact with the faculty member in appropriate measure, to report that as 6 contact hours. So it's really the 4 units for the class plus 2 additional hours to make up for what otherwise would be lost. That's kind of a complicated story, and I'm sorry to make it so complicated, but that's what it is.
And that provision only applies to, per Title V, Section 58009, to independent study laboratory courses or distance education laboratory courses, not work experience. There's no such thing as a work experience lab. There's no adjustment factor for the lab for work experience. There's just straight units for work experience.
Okay, and by the way, talk about, you have to be really, really careful. Be absolutely sure that all of your work experience classes, whatever you call them, they may not be specifically called work experience in your curriculum, but be very sure that they're by the alternative attendance accounting method. I have seen some mistakes along that line, and we always want to be careful about that. Okay, so the FTES calculation, you know how that's done by now from the previous examples. You take the number of students enrolled at census, you multiply by weekly contact hours. I put that in quotation marks because they're not really contact hours, but they're the numbers that come from the units. Multiply by the term length multiplier and divide by 525. And remember my comment earlier that it's that same term length multiplier whether the course is offered in the summertime or wintertime or during a part of a semester. Okay. Until 2002, all distance ed had to be assigned to this method. Current regulations allow any appropriate attendance accounting method to be used for distance ed courses, but I put appropriate in italics and yellow print there because it's almost never possible. You'll almost never find an appropriate class for weekly student contact hours. The days of offering television courses where everybody turns on the TV at 10 o'clock in the morning and watches the teacher just are kind of gone. So it's very hard. There's a guideline in the documents that we're showing.
Yes, there's a document that's on our website, the attributes of a distance education course on the weekly census, daily census, or positive attendance accounting procedures. And so I think once you review that criteria in that document, you'll see why most distance education classes will not be accounted for in any other procedure other than the alternative attendance accounting procedure.
Yeah.
And that includes hybrid courses.
Okay. I'm going to just go through questions that have come in here just to see if there are some that we can do quickly. Please go over non-credit distance ed calculation. Considering the demand, many agencies would like to start offering non-credit distance ed. I'll give it a very quick trip through, a very quick one, and you'll have the stuff to refer to really get into it more and more and more. Do Saturday and Sunday count towards 3 days? Well, I don't know of any colleges that have instructional weeks that include Saturday and Sunday.
Right. Although a lot of classes do have classes on Saturday for sure, and some Sunday, and those are countable towards the 175-day rule for the most part. For purposes of determining your term length multiplier, those days would not count. It's only days that have courses on the weekly census procedure courses. So that would normally be Monday through Friday.
Yeah, and let's just point out that it's entirely legal to offer classes on Saturdays and Sundays, in fact, on any day of the year except the state-mandated holidays, so that there's nothing wrong with reporting hours calculated. In fact, you can have Saturday weekly census classes, no problem. If you had it, I think it's very rare that
It's very rare, especially if you consider, like, for example, in the fall semester, with Saturday after Thanksgiving, most colleges close for the weekend, and so it is very rare. But for the most part, we only count Monday through Friday relative to that minimum requirement that there be 3 days of instruction and/or examination.
Right. Here's a question: for a 16-week semester, is the term length multiplier still 17 and a half?
In terms of that question, it depends how you got to a 16-week semester. If you got to a 16-week semester, not because you compressed, but because you've adopted the maximum flexible calendar of 15 days, which would have taken out 3 weeks out of the 35-week academic calendar, that would have only left you 2 16-week semesters. But according to Title V, as an FTES adjustment, so you don't lose money because you're on a 15-day flex calendar program, Title V says you can continue to use 17.5. However, that's a different kind of scenario than a district that normally compresses its academic terms to 2 16-week semesters. And in that case, the term length multiplier would no longer be 17.5. It'd be, if it doesn't have a flexible calendar, it would just be 16.0 would be your multiplier. If you have some flex days, it could be a little bit more. But so that's kind of the best I can answer that question. I kind of gave you the scenario where a district has a 15-day flex calendar program that results in 2 16-week semesters. It's not really compressed because it's a full flexible calendar, and you still get to use 17.5. And again, I contrasted that with a compressed calendar that has some flex days. The term length multiplier in that case would be something like 16.2, 16.3, 16.4, depending on the number of flex days that you have.
Complicated question.
And when we go through the process of reviewing and approving a compressed calendar application, which must be approved by the Chancellor's office before you change the lengths of your academic terms, we do establish the district's term length multiplier under the compressed calendar in that conversion. So it is established, kind of set in stone, unless the district once again changes its academic calendar configuration.
Okay. When a census for a daily student contact hour class falls on the first day, would enrollment as of census be calculated as of the second meeting or the second calendar day? It's meeting. The census days are always meeting days in the daily census ones, if I'm not mistaken. And Elias, if you come up with something alternative to that, we'll elaborate on it a little later. Is non-credit, non-resident treated differently? Actually, in most cases, all non-credit is reported under the resident column on the 320. Non-credit courses that qualify for that, almost all of it is under the resident column. Elias, where are cases where non-residents are reported in the non-resident column for non-credit classes?
There is a Title V section that, and this is where it can get very difficult, that require that for a non-resident to be claimed in a non-credit course, they have to be legally admitted into the United States. So I'll get you that Title V reference in a second. Okay.
Boy, you got some good questions here, folks. That's great. Please define TBA and give an example of how it's properly applied to weekly census, positive attendance, daily census, and alternative. Well, defining TBA simply means that the specific day, the specific hours at which the class activity is done is left open. It's by arrangement. And it's possible, for example, let's give an example of a lecture class that has, 30 or 40 students in it, and there is laboratory work done associated with that lecture class, but it's not possible to fit all the students in the laboratory at one time. And so the students are allowed to make individual arrangements for that laboratory work, and the lab is open maybe for 3 different 3-hour periods, and the students can sign up for one of 3 different ones. In that sense, they could be registered in the course on an hours by arrangement basis and then decide with the approval of the instructor and the people coordinating the lab spaces to do their lab on Tuesday or to do their lab on Thursday or to do their lab on Wednesday afternoon. That would be an example of hours by arrangement. Still, there are other cases where it's done in a more or less open laboratory deal, where they can kind of go in at their pleasure. Really tricky area, though, when you do that, because let's say, for example, it's a 3-hour lecture class, and it's 3 hours a week lecture, and 1 hour by arrangement each week. Number one, in a weekly census class, that 1 hour by arrangement has to be each week. It can't be like, say, 16 hours during the course of the term, and it doesn't matter if you do 2 hours one week and no hours the next week or whatever. That throws off the whole concept of weekly student contact hours. So it cannot be a sum total of so many hours. And if you say, well, the student couldn't stay the whole hour this particular day, all right, the student can come back for another portion of the hour, if you will, and this is where we get a little bit flexible about this 50-minute business, because it's not really a class session that's going on. I have heard it approved, and Elias, you correct me if I'm wrong, if within that week the minutes that the student puts in amount to the 1 hour of time or 2 hours of time or whatever the requirement is, that it would be administratively approved.
Recently, part of the our training to auditors that we gave last week, we've had some questions come up already on TBA, and that's how one district is basically doing it. So at this point in time, as long as the minutes that the students put in per week add up to that at least 50 minutes for that hour requirement, that would be acceptable. But again, that's kind of a new question, so I'm sure there's going to be further discussion, but if there's anything different, anything changes on that, we would let you know.
Positive attendance, by contrast, they can do it any time they want. Remember, of course, fitting within your academic requirements, but what I'm saying is for the attendance accounting side of it, we're adding up actual hours when the student was there, so TBA in that sense. A daily census, as I told you, very, very difficult to handle TBA hours with daily census because they have to be done, and the weekly one we said they had to be done each week. Daily, they have to be done each day. So it's almost an impossibility to do TBA hours with daily census. And alternative attendance accounting method, there aren't any TBA hours. Doesn't make any sense. There aren't any hours at all.
The whole purpose of TBA is to try and continue to qualify a course for the basic weekly or daily census attendance accounting procedure. So under alternative attendance accounting procedure, there's no such thing as TBA for that procedure.
Yeah, and the language here, DMV2, so if the distance ed is coded as independent study, blah, 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 we'll count it, even though it's really TBA. It isn't TBA. TBA, the words as we use that TBA, is scheduling work that is done in a classroom or laboratory setting at variable hours. It's not used for distance education.
No.
TBA and distance education are two different things.
Again, always think of TBA in the context of qualifying for the scheduling requirements of weekly or daily census.
And that involves classroom work. It doesn't, or laboratory work. It doesn't involve studying at home.
Right. TBA, if you look at the legal advisory for TBA and all the documentation, it requires immediate supervision and control and all those factors that are normally not part of distance education. Those are subject to different regular and effective contact requirements. So, again, TBA is only in the context of weekly or daily census attendance accounting procedures.
Right. Okay. Moving along here, when is the census date? We'd answered that earlier. I really can't repeat that. You'll have to look through the materials, or you can certainly contact us individually if you have a question on that. I don't know what when is the census date means. Okay.
And
I wonder if she's talking perhaps about the alternative attendance accounting method. Let's answer that. Elias, why don't you give the answer that you gave this morning on that?
It's a question in terms of when is the census date. For the alternative attendance accounting procedure, basically online distance education courses that aren't really meeting, you have to count the number of calendar days, excluding mandated holidays, and then it'd be 20% of those calendar days, and that would be your census date.
So take the calendar, count the days, then go 20% of the way through, but in counting the number of days, don't count legal holidays. And that would be the answer to that. Now, the next question here, how do you account for a 5-unit class offered in 8 weeks instead of a full semester? Are you paid half as much? No, you are not paid half as much. If you're offering a 5-unit course by distance education in 8 weeks, you're paid the very same amount as if you're offering it in 16 weeks. The point is, the work, you get into all kinds of educational questions about it, is how the academic work could ever be done that fast. But the answer is no, you would be paid the very same amount because the term length multiplier is what governs that, even if it's done, as I told you, in the summertime, wintertime, fall semester, spring semester, whenever.
Yeah, Title V allows you to use a course length multiplier that results in the same contact hours that would have resulted if you provided that same class in a semester. So it's really the same formula for a short-term session. Alternative attendance accounting procedure.
Yes. Here's a question, and I'll be interested to hear Elias's answer to this because I don't know the answer to it. I don't think it's supposedly possible. For distance ed, what if you have a 3-unit class that normally needs 4 hours a week? Now let's talk about a regular on-campus class that normally meets 4 hours a week, but the additional hour is not a lab hour, but simply an additional lecture hour.
No, you're limited by regulation to only claiming 3-unit contact hours converted to contact hours. So
we don't offer 4 lecture hour classes for 3 units on campus, do we?
Right, but I'm saying he's given a scenario where, they're doing that. They're for whatever reason, maybe they substituted some of the hours that the student works independently, maybe on homework or something like that.
What?
But I know that's not John is referring to, that's not the normal conversion. But just in the straight technical answer to your question, if the answer is no, you limit it to 3 contact hours for the 3 units of credit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, I haven't seen that, but...
Yeah, and I never heard of a regular lecture class on campus where 4 lecture hours and you get 3 units. That's out of whack with the Carnegie thing, it seems to me. But I don't know. You may know a lot more than I do.
Right.
Okay, let's go to this next one. What about a hybrid course where it's online for all except a first week in-person orientation and in-person final? Okay, that hybrid course falls under the alternative attendance accounting method. So whether some of it is on campus or not, you're not going to get any extra apportionment FTES out of the class because you're having some on-campus stuff. It's a hybrid class is said.
In order to qualify for the weekly or daily census accounting procedures, the entire course as a whole have to meet the regular scheduling requirements. It can't just be part of it, and we only allow 1 attendance accounting procedure per course. So in that hybrid class, as a whole, it doesn't meet the requirement. It defaults to the alternative attendance accounting procedure.
Right. And Abe, the answer to your question is no. Can you have a weekly student contact hour class that is coterminous with start and end of the primary term but skips 2 weeks, not necessarily consecutive during the term? The answer is no. It has to meet regularly throughout the term on every day that is in the 175-day calendar of the term. You can't do that. Can TBA be online? We've answered that already. There's no such thing. They're 2 different things. TBA basically refers to on-campus activity in classrooms and laboratories. Online is when you it's a different use of the term.
Again, as John mentioned, 99% of online courses are going to be on the alternative attendance accounting procedure because they can't meet the regular scheduling requirement or the contact requirements that are required. But if you do have that 1% that's a live, fully interactive television course or online web course where there's opportunity for the student to interact live, yes, it is possible technically to have TBA in a distance education course, but it's going to be very, very difficult to do.
Yeah. Now this next question from Mike at Skyline. If you have a regular class that meets 3 hours a week with 1 hour TBA, and your catalog states it that way, how can you offer that same class without the TBA in an online format? That you better take up with your curriculum committee and, format. TBA hours are supposed to be part of the course outline. It's part of what students are evaluated on. It's instruction. It's not supposed to be homework or anything like that. So whatever that TBA hour represents on campus as additional instruction that is offered uniformly to all students, that all students are uniformly evaluated for that TBA time, because you're claiming it as instruction, you better, if you're offering that class online, you better find a way to provide that instruction in that medium as well. Yeah.
Otherwise, you probably have a problem.
I mean, he's kind of talking like laboratory. It's kind of in that area.
Right.
But tricky.
Yeah, that'll be tricky.
Tricky at best. So hybrid class, how is census date calculated? Well, we already explained that. Elias answered that question. The hybrid class is going to fall into the alternative attendance accounting method, and you take the duration of the class and you count up all of the Monday through Sunday, all of the calendar days from the start date to the end date, exclude holidays, and take 20% of the way through. what would be the attendance accounting method for a course that meets regularly every other week rather than weekly for 8 weeks rather than 16 weeks? Probably daily census. Probably daily census.
It's definitely not coterminous.
Yeah. No, it sounds like if it met regularly in terms of the number of hours per day, it would be a daily census.
Yeah,
that would be fine. Can you give an example of a distance ed course that would fall under the daily, oh boy, almost impossible.
Some are, right, some are dish, some are, I think maybe I didn't send it.
Yeah. Well, you know, wanting to know, can you have a distance ed, give an example where we would find a distance ed course under daily student contact. Distance ed under daily, meaning the alternative method daily.
That's what they mean.
If that's what you mean, of course, that's fine. Alternative daily, you're going to use your standard term length multiplier, and the computations are just the very same as it would be if it were weekly. I'm not sure Daniel and Mission, I don't think we 100% answer your question because I don't think we 100% understand it. But I think we're going to have to go on from there. Come back with more or contact us individually. Okay, David K. says, all of our online class time is scheduled as TBA. Well, it's a misnomer to call it TBA in the way we're talking.
I get contacted by auditors, you know, because we've instructed them to audit TBA. It's in the Contractor District Audit Manual as one of the state compliance items. And they're finding that some of the colleges are using the term TBA generically for their online classes. And my advice to colleges is don't call it TBA because it's become a technical term that you're held to certain standards. And so maybe they can come up with a different term, but the online courses that we're talking about are not what we have come to know as TBA. And if you know, TBA requires all the things that are in the legal advisory, all the things that are in the follow-up memorandums. And if you're calling your online classes TBA, I'm not sure why you would do that because TBA talks about to be arranged. And most of your online classes, you're not going to arrange
you can arrange any hours at all.
Any hours
at
all.
Do the work when you want to.
Right. So I would recommend calling it something else so that way, you know, auditors are less confused when they're out there looking for your TBA classes to audit. Yeah.
Tina, how can I schedule for lecture 8 hours and 32 lecture for 16 weeks? Oh, comes again. How can I schedule lecture 8 hours and lab 32 for 16 weeks for weekly census? Well, I don't understand.
If you're asking about guidance for scheduling a course in a compressed 16-week academic calendar, I would strongly recommend that you review the Student Attendance Accounting Manual addendum on course scheduling and academic calendars, and they'll have suggested scheduling patterns based on the number of weekly contact hours for the course.
Somebody asked if there are more slides. There certainly are.
Yeah,
this presentation goes until 3:30.
So we should probably
we have more to move on to. Yeah. Okay. On we go.
Yeah, let's go. Wow.
Oh, lots of good questions.
This is quite a group.
Yes, it is. That's great. All right, non-credit distance education. Much as I would like to oblige you on it, given our time situation and given those questions we had on really stuff that's involved for most people right now.
There's very detailed guidance in the Student Attendance Accounting Manual on accounting for those classes on page 3.13. Review that section on non-credit distance education. After you review it, then give me a call directly.
Yeah. And we're going to skip through these slides, but you can look at them. The slide thing will be out there. You can read it. Okay. A point that I'd like to make, that we would like to make, is the cooperation between instruction and admissions and records that's needed to do a really good job on attendance accounting. And this is just kind of a reminder from my experience through the years. The colleges that have done the very best job in attendance accounting and administration are those where there's a really good working relationship between the instruction office divisions and departments. They don't each do each other's work, but they work with each other. And when one has a question about the part of the job that the other does, they ask it. There's good open communication between them. The instruction office and divisions and departments, one way or another, develop the schedule of classes, build sections in the computer. The admissions and records folks manage admissions and registration, attendance reporting by faculty, but there's a lot of cases where the admissions and records folks will have, some questions about or problems with some of the stuff on the other side of the fence, and vice versa. So keep those communication lines open. IT is so important, providing technical support. And that's about all they should be expected, in my experience, to provide. Maintain hardware and ERP software, ensure data integrity and security, controlling access to data, supporting users, assisting users in understanding the system, and troubleshooting problems. Those are so important in having an attendance accounting system work well. But the IT folks should not be asked to maintain, to determine, to alter, to change data. Really important to keep that in the hands of the folks who have to, really work with that data. In building a section, 3 critical characteristics, as a matter of fact, 4 of them, affecting attendance reporting. The attendance accounting method, you want to determine that one accurately. You determine and work from the meeting schedule. In formulating that schedule, you want to be careful to do it in a way that will accommodate the attendance accounting method you're targeting to use. Carefully calculating the contact hours with all our fancy table there and so forth. That's so critical. And establishing the correct census date. If these 4 things are done accurately, I want to tell you, working with those sections is a breeze. What do you want to call it? Secrets to success in this are dealing properly with those 4 items. Determining appropriate attendance accounting method based on the term, start, end dates, and meeting schedule. Calculating daily or weekly contact hours based upon scheduled hours of instruction for the individual section, not the target catalog hours for the course. Let's pause there for a moment. You see that part in yellow there. Very, very important. Courses have a course outline, and they are approved for a certain target number of hours. You'll see, for example, on a course outline, 48 hours of lecture, 72 hours of lab associated with this course. When you go to set up the computer system, what you put into the system is not that target number of hours, but the actual hours which are scheduled. And those actual hours can be different from that target, sometimes more, sometimes fewer. Particularly in daily census classes, you can get into big trouble by using that target number of hours. Daily census classes fool you sometimes because of the holidays that cut down the number of hours. And you may think you've got 48 hours, but you only have 45. Or you may think you have 48 hours and you actually have 51. You have to report what actually happens and not what you think or the curriculum committee said should happen. So that one is an item that you really want to pay close attention to be sure you're doing that. Building a section, weekly or daily census, you want to be sure you have the right census date in there. We talked about how you determine those 2 census dates. A couple of examples of building a section. Let's say we've got Math 250, a fall semester full-term class meeting Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 8 o'clock to 9:15 in the morning. What is the appropriate attendance accounting method? Weekly census is just fine for that class. What are the contact hours? Well, in the first place, it's a weekly census class, isn't it? So we know that what we have to enter into our system and work with is the number of weekly contact hours. Well, the class meets Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That's 3 times for 8 to 9:15. By our trusty table, we found that 8 to 9:15 is 1.5 contact hours. 3 times 1.5 is 4.5. So we've got 4.5 weekly contact hours. We know that the census date is the term census date for weekly census classes. And so we know how to fill in those items when we're building that section. Similarly, if we have a class, an English class, that is an 8-week class, and it meets Tuesday and Thursday from 10:10 to 11:15. First of all, it's a daily census class because it's 8 weeks and it meets regularly. Secondly, we're interested not in weekly contact hours this time, but daily contact hours because it's a daily census class. And so we're going to take that 8-week class and we're going to say each day it meets from 10:10 to 11:15, which we already know how to calculate, 1.3, and it's 1.3 daily contact hours. And because it's an 8-week class meeting Tuesday and Thursday, it has 16 meetings, doesn't it? And 20% of 16 is 3.2. And we round 3.2 down to 3. We use standard rounding there, by the way. If it had come out 2.8, it would also be 3. Okay? The third class meeting is the census date, and we know how to put that in the computer. Admissions and records, folks, we have to be very, very, very sure that not only do we have the right census date in the computer, but the instructor knows what that special census date is for that special daily census class, and that the roster business of having them verify attendance is done with respect to that specific census date for that specific class. Admissions and Records has to ensure that the instructors of weekly and daily census classes drop inactive students as of the census date, and ensure that instructors of positive attendance classes report accurate individual total hours of attendance for each enrolled student, including students who drop the class at any point during the term. So remember, it has no connection for positive attendance. There's no census date concept at all. And a student who comes in and just attends 2 meetings and then decides it's a terrible class and goes away, we still can collect for that 2 hours of attendance. And the student who stays through midterm but drops out, we can collect everything through midterm.
I'll make a point here, too. Once in a while I get questions on canceled classes. How does cancellation of a class affect the apportionment? And it depends on the type of procedure that is applied in the class. If we're talking about a census procedure, weekly or daily, then if the class is canceled, then you can't claim apportionment because the class didn't meet regularly for the term or the session as it applies to either weekly or daily census. So you don't get to claim any apportionment for that particular class, census class that was canceled. However, if you cancel a positive attendance class, you can claim the contact hours, the actual contact hours that were actually generated up to the point that the class was canceled. So it's a little different, but it is a kind of a fairly regular question that I get.
Good. That was a great addition there. TBA hours. Okay, here we come with this dangerous little territory of TBA. So be careful, be careful. Ensure that TBA hours for weekly census classes are required each week. We talked about that earlier, not as a total number of hours for the term. Ensure that TB hours for daily census classes are required each day, not as a total number of hours per week or a total number of hours for duration of the class. Ensure that attendance records are kept and that no TBA hours are reported for weekly census and daily census classes for students who have documented 0 hours as of the census point. Well, I harped on the first paragraph so many times and the second paragraph so many times, I'm not going to talk more about them. But I do want to talk a little more about the third one. First of all, remember how we said instructors hate to maintain records of positive attendance. Well, they have to do it again here, big time, if it's TBA. We have to have attendance records down to the specific day, time that the student attended, or the day at any rate, that the student attended and how much time was attended for each TBA class. So it's a mess in terms of attendance maintenance, in terms of record maintenance, number one. And number two, to deal with this last part is a difficult thing for computer systems. Think of what it means. Let's say we have a class that is a 3-unit class and it has 3 lecture hours. Well, let's say it's a 4-unit class. And let's say it has 3 lecture hours and 3 hours TBA to be done at the student's convenience, blah, blah, blah. Okay. For that TBA deal, if the student is active in the class and is reported as a weekly census as an active student, that's fine for the lecture part. But for that TBA part, if no TBA hours have been documented for that student by the time the census date rolls around, what the rules tell us is we have to cut back and for that student report 3 weekly contact hours rather than 6 weekly contact hours for the student. Well, in most systems, there's no way to do that. You'd have to have another section. You'd have to drop that student from that section and create another section that has 3 weekly contact hours and enroll the student in that as a lecture-only session without TBA. So it's a mess, folks. It's a mess. That's all I can say. Let's see, a couple of questions came along here. Let's see if we can quickly deal with them before we move to our next slide. Can lab hours be lab? Well, that one, non-credit distance ed, I'm sorry, Valentina, I've got to bypass with that one now. Feel free to contact us individually on that. I just can't get into that one now. It'd take too long to explain. Does the Chancellor's Office still recognize minimum and maximum catalog hours? In the past, 54 hours approved for a course could be offered for a minimum of 48. Does this rule still apply?
You know, I don't work in academic affairs, but I can tell you that there's really 2 areas here. One has to do with establishing a local policy for the relationship of hours to units of credit. And again, there's guidance in the Program of Course Approval Handbook on doing that. Title 5, Section 55002.5 speak to that and guide you the increments by which you have to increase the units of credit. That's one area, one separate issue than how you offer the course, how you schedule a course, in order to qualify for these procedures, and that's a different question. You know,
usually I want to say this. It's in this Carnegie unit area that we're talking about, the expectation of so much academic work being done by the student for a certain number of units. And if I remember correctly, Elias, the 48 to 54 has been considered as a reasonable range for classes, not fewer than 48 hours, but if their structure allows them to go up to high as 51 or even 54, then that's considered tolerable. And if the attendance is documented up to that amount, then it can be reported up to that amount. It seems to recall that, but that really is an academic affairs question and not an attendance.
Right. I mean, the basic point is that, you know, if you look at again, you know, we're kind of getting to the academic area, but there is a Title V section that requires the district to indicate the number of hours that are required for a course on the course on a record. And so that's there, and there's another Title V section that requires you to claim FTES consistent with that indicated number of hours in that course on a record.
Minor variation.
Yeah, I would imagine that there could be some variations, but that's part of that local policy that your district governing board would establish, and perhaps the Program of Course Approval Handbook might even address that. I'm not sure if it does or not.
If a student drops a class on the census date, can apportionment be claimed? The answer is yes. The determination by the instructor is whether there is active enrollment up to the day before the census date. So if the student has been attending and the instructor comes in on census date and the student drops on that census date and has been in attendance up to that point, if the drop is processed on census date, yes, apportionment would be computed. If the class is yes, well that was the answer we gave you. Why would a TBA be daily student contact hours instead of positive attendance? Well, number one, we're talking about another way of saying it is, how can you have a daily student contact hour class with a TBA? Typically, the only way that would happen would be if the class has a lecture part and a TBA part as well. And for some reason, you thought you really could pull it off, that every student would be required to do a certain amount of TBA work on every day on which the class meets. Like you had a laboratory deal where you said your lecture class is from, 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock, and if you want, you can come in and do your 1-hour laboratory at 9 o'clock in the morning every day the class meets, or at 10 o'clock, or at 11 o'clock, or whatever. I don't see it being very practical. I've never heard of it, but theoretically, you could do it. Okay, passing on from TBA hours, we're going to come to a little table, a slide here called FOE, frequently observed errors. We've all heard of FAQs. Well, these are our FOEs that we just say, consider your schedule work, consider all you do, and watch out for them. They are traps that sometimes some of us fall into, and it's good to make sure, take it as a checklist for your school and be sure that you don't have any of them going on, because they're just invitation to trouble when the auditors come. Okay, hybrid courses inappropriately assigned to weekly census or daily census method. We've talked about that repeatedly here today. Basically, they all have to be alternative attendance accounting method, but if you want to read that special document, I'm going to show you the locations of these special documents in a moment, and if you think you can qualify one, fine, but you probably can't. Another common error, daily census courses with, quote, weekly lab hours. I mean, I have seen it in print, in schedules, where it says, this is a daily census course, an 8-week course, and it meets Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9 o'clock, and there are weekly lab hours, Tuesdays from 2 to 5 or something. It can't be daily census, either on a TBA basis or fixed hour basis. Summer courses assigned to weekly census. We talked about that. That's a big no-no. Summer intersessions reported in the wrong academic year or in both academic years. Hold on that one a minute. We're going to go to another slide where we talk about that. Catalog hours reported rather than schedule hours. We talked about that a few minutes ago. Can't do that. TBA hours irregularities. Well, we touched on a lot of those possible irregularities. We thought it was good to point out some of the things that the Chancellor's office asked the auditors to watch for, because if you know what they're looking for and the documents they're expecting to see, you can kind of have them ready for them and be on top of that and be ahead of them. So you can read through those at your convenience. The governing board policies are established and documented, that the required tabulations are maintained, that attendance records are retained for the right retention period, usually 3 years after the year being audited, and verifying that an appropriate attendance accounting method is used to assign each course section, verify that they're scheduled according to all that we've been talking about, and verified that Chancellor's Office approval for credit courses and all the non-credit courses and most of the credit courses. There are a few little exceptions. So just good for you to know that. Now, reporting periods. When do you report a class? Remember, there are these 3 reporting periods. Gosh, it seems like hours ago, doesn't it? First period, second period, and third period. You have to decide when to report each class. Well, census classes are reported in the period in which the census date falls. By contrast, positive attendance courses are reported in the period in which the last class meeting occurs. All right, those two are pretty understandable. Now we get down to the exception. Isn't that always where the fun comes? Well, this is actually a nice exception because it gives you some flexibility that otherwise you wouldn't have. Attendance for daily census sections who have a census date before July 1 and an ending date after July 1, they be reported in either fiscal year. So we might say these are straddler sections. They begin early enough that their census date, the 20% point, occurs before July 1. But they end late enough that their ending date is after July 1. So, question, normally you would report it where the census date occurs and be done with it. But this gives you flexibility. If you want to take those early classes that have their census date before July 1 and push them over into the following year, that exception is possible. And the caveat on that earlier slide was, be very careful that you don't report them in both years. That would be double dipping, a big no-no. And in some of the attendance accounting systems, in some of the computer systems, you can do that if you're not careful. So you just have to be careful that you don't do that. Apprenticeship is reported in a different report, the CCFS 321 report. Again, the big caveat here, be careful you don't report it both on this and on the 320 report. And it's done by contact hours only, no FTES involved. I already told you a little bit about the annualizer business of how you do your guesswork at first period and second period. You come up with a magic multiplier here, and you can read about this. Very few of you are involved in preparing the report, so we'll let you off the hook on that one. Flexible calendar, Elias talked a little bit about that. In cases where you have, excuse me, please. In cases where you have a flexible calendar and you have some days on which staff development work is done rather than the student sitting in a classroom, you would lose FTES because of fewer positive attendance hours, for example. The procedures involving flex calendar calculations and flex hours make that good. In other words, they give you a factor that makes up for that lost time. A number of reference documents. You're going to have a copy of this presentation available for download on the Chancellor's Office website. It includes links to a lot of good reference documents. I'm not going to talk about them all here, but want you to know that they're there for you if you need them. The attendance reports that the auditors will be looking for, things that you should have ready for them. Contact hours summary by attendance accounting method. All of the computer systems, Datatel and Banner and PeopleSoft, they all have these in one form or another. Contact hours summary by attendance accounting method. Contact hours by section within attendance accounting method, and then a section detail report that goes right down to the individual roster, shows each student, whether that student is a resident or a non-resident, the number of contact hours reported for that student. So when the auditors pick a sample of classes to look at, they'll get down to that level. The published schedule of classes, and of course the course outline of record. These are the principal documents which are used for audit. I list a question and answer page here with Elias and my addresses and telephone or email addresses and telephone numbers, and they're put there for good reason. Before we open and look at those last questions, I want to go navigate in the Chancellor's Office website for just a moment. For those of you who don't use it often, I want you to see how to use it to find a few key things. It'll take just a moment to do that. Okay, Elias, guide me through here. What do I press?
You have to go to Tools, Application Sharing. I think you have to share an entire desktop.
Then I'll come down here, and now I'll go over here, and now I'll put in the www.cccco.edu as the URL, and it will bring up the home page of the Chancellor's office. You're not going to be able to see the whole screen probably unless you rearrange your monitor, but you'll see enough when I navigate down the left-hand side here. All right, to see most of the documents we want to talk about, come to Chancellor's Office tab, come down to Divisions, and now go over to Finance and Facilities. Okay? Do you see that path? Chancellor's Office, Divisions, Finance and Facilities. Click on that. Then, within that, go to the Fiscal Services unit. Within that, go to the Allocations section. And within that, go to Handbooks and Manuals. And you come to a magic page that Elias has developed here. It has so many goodies on it, he ought to charge a fee for approaching this page. All right. First of all, you have the all-important Student Attendance Accounting Manual at the top. Then you have a primer on FTES. You can read it if you want to. It's a lot of the stuff we talked about today. But here are these three important things: the turn length multiplier list, this hours versus schedule overview. We didn't show it on the screen today, but take a look at it. If you're ever tempted to use catalog hours rather than schedule hours, you'll see why it's so important. And then the contact hours computation chart that we showed. Okay, to be arranged hours. Here's a big, wonderful paper on TBA hours. So that'll convince you why they're a dangerous territory to be in once you read that. Distance education. Here's this attributes on a weekly, daily, or positive attendance procedures document, and then the full distance education guidelines. Have more than you ever could dream about distance education. And some other things, including concurrent enrollment, tutoring regulations, instructional service agreements, course withdrawal and repetition. That stuff is changing, by the way, so keep an eye on this page. There'll be new things attached to it before long. Residency determination, all we want to know about that. Remember we talked about the program and course approval handbook from the Academic Affairs Division. You've got it there. So a great page. Now, another part of the website I want you to look at. Go back to the Chancellor's office. Come down to Divisions. Come over here and go to Legal. Oh boy, here is a treasure trove. Legal opinions and advisories. You can click on those and see lists of them. But wait till you see this one. Legal resources. Click on Legal resources. And it brings up a page that has three levels: Chancellor's office, state, and federal. I'm going to show you just one here. Go to state. Suppose you want to find some section of the education code. No problem. Click on education code. Up comes the entire education code. Stop buying those $100 binders, folks. They're outmoded the day they're delivered to you. Okay, here you've got the education code. You want to come down into the 70,000 section where the community college stuff is? Great. You want a particular section? Click on it, and there it is. What more could you ask? And all of it doesn't cost 5 cents. Okay, come over to state again. Suppose you want a Title V section. Come down under California Regulations. Click on California Regulations. You want to know Title V section what? Give me a good section, Elias.
55002.5.
55002. Sorry, I better learn to type here. 0.5. 55002.5. I put in Title V and that, press a button, and magic occurs. Here it is. Click on it, and you've got the current, up-to-the-minute Title V section you were looking for. So that alone is worth the price of admission at today's session, wouldn't you say? Okay, well, so much for that. Let us come back to reality here and say, number one, thank you very, very much for attending today. We're getting near the end of our time here. This page is displayed on here so that you record, if you don't already have it, our names and email addresses. And of course, you know this whole presentation is going to be posted to that very same page that Elias had there up in the general section. If any of you have any additional questions, we can take a few more minutes right now, but I think it's fair to those who signed up for a deal that went to 3:30 that we say, my clock says 3:29, and it's time to say goodbye. But do stay on if you have any questions. We'll be here for a few minutes. You don't have to hang up right this minute. Thanks to all of you for attending today. We hope you found it helpful, and may it be the beginning of your continuing love affair with community college attendance accounting.
Yes, thank you very much, folks. I really enjoy my job working with the colleges on student attendance accounting, and this has just been a great day. We had a morning session, we had an afternoon session, and we just appreciate your very valuable time. Thank you.
Thanks, folks.